Bookshelf Tour, Part 2. Let's have a look at the books from Bowles all the way to Durrell. Beginning with Paul Bowles, one of the most underappreciated authors of the Beat generation. In fact, I don't think he is typically considered along with Kerouac and Burroughs, but he was there at the same time. We have his collection of short stories, The Delicate Prey, which has the most devious short story I've ever read. I don't really like to give anything away. When I like a book, all I want to do is to say, this is a good book, you should give it a try. But I don't want to give any specific details because I think even the slightest bit of detail ruins the experience because you're anticipating, you're waiting. Oh, well, when are we going to get to that scene that he told me about? I can't wait to get to that scene because he said that was an amazing scene. So I'm not even going to tell you which is the short story that is so unbelievably deviant. I had to go back and am I reading this correctly? Is what I think happening actually happening? Yeah, pretty plainly it is happening. And you never really want to say that you enjoy so much reading about something that is so completely socially unacceptable. But it is pretty good reading. This book is just so violent and so outside of natural society. You've never read anything that just will make you very happy for the comforts that exist in your life because the violence is just exquisite. Paul Bowles' most famous novel, The Sheltering Sky. I think one of the things I love most about literature is to read a book and it is startling because I have never read anything like it. This novel takes me in a direction that I've never even considered as an option in life. That is how odd it is to read the great books. You'd think, oh man, there's so many destinies that humanity might have. And we only have this one, so that's why it's a great thing to read so many books because you can see and appreciate and realize that life is just, you've only got the one that you've got. And, most likely it's going to be very boring and common. Mine certainly is. So read books about things that are uncommon. If you're interested in Paul Bowles, there are some really good biographies about him on YouTube. I'll link to one in the description below because I think he's deeply underappreciated. But if you're going to read Paul Bowles, you've got to have a strong stomach because it's not the easy stuff. A lot of these books on this shelf in this little tour, for some reason I picked up at these free little libraries that we have in the local neighborhood. I don't know if you've got them, but we have these little closets that people put their books in and you take a book and you leave a book. And I do this big scouring tour more often than I'd like to admit to see if there are any books. And yeah, if there's something that has a name or something that I kind of recognize, I'll pick it up, which is why I have this. Richard Brautigan, Willard and His Bowling Trophies, a perverse mystery. I've never read any Brautigan. I know he's famous. In Ottawa, I used to go to this poetry reading series with this guy named Rob McLennan, who's kind of a famous Canadian poet. And he always used to wear this t-shirt, this Richard Brautigan t-shirt, so frequently that I still remember it 30 years later, Rob and his goddamn Brautigan t-shirt. I've never read any. I think it's kind of goofy. I really can't say because I haven't read any. Some Canadian content here. Ernest Buckler, The Cruelest Month. Ernest Buckler wrote one of my favorite Canadian novels ever, The Mountain and the Valley. If you're interested in Canadian literature and you want to get a taste of what I think is one of the best Canadian novels of all time, The Mountain and the Valley. And I thought that was his one and only novel. So when I saw that he had this, The Cruelest Month, I picked it up. I haven't read it. I have a fondness for this publishing company, which is the New Canadian Library, because their books are just so hopelessly ugly. I don't know why. It just makes me think that marketing wasn't invented. Blurb, name, some ugly abstract bullshit. There you go. There's your goddamn literature, you highbrow idiots. So I tend to buy these, but then they're so old that they tend to be too fragile to read them in the bath. And you've got to be patient with Canadian literature because it does tend to be dry and long-winded. Good in the end. You're happy you've read it, but there's not a great deal of excitement in Canadian literature. Another Canadian right away, Morley Callahan, More Joy in Heaven. Same publishing company. And I think I picked it up for exactly the same reason. Look at that. It's ugly. Morley Callahan, stories. Now, Morley Callahan is very interesting. I may as well get to it right away because of this book, That Summer in Paris. Morley Callahan was an author based in Toronto who was getting famous for his short stories. And when Ernest Hemingway was writing for the Toronto Star newspaper, Morley Callahan was there as a junior reporter as well, and he met the great Hemingway. And they became acquaintances. So Hemingway went off to Paris to become the great 20th century author, and Callahan also went to Paris, just for a summer, I believe, or perhaps only for 6 months. And while he was in Paris, he and Hemingway used to box, exercise. And I love this book because if you have ever had a suspicion that Hemingway was an arrogant bully, egotistical, and insufferable, this book proves it. This is a biography of Callahan's experience in Paris. He meets Joyce, he meets Fitzgerald, drunk, and he boxes with Hemingway. Biography, not fiction. I've never felt the same way about Ernest Hemingway since reading this book, which is wonderful. And apparently it's very, very difficult to come by. I think it's easier in Canada because he's a Canadian author, so there are more copies in Canada. This is a great book if you kind of want to change your opinions about Hemingway. If you thought he was like a good guy, this will really change your mind. Even though I'm not a huge fan of Callahan's novels, I believe it's the short stories that really made him known as an author. He was up there with Fitzgerald and Hemingway for a while, for a time, and he kind of faded into obscurity. He just faded away, like a lot of authors do. Italo Calvino, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. This is one of the very first videos I ever made, and I can't even watch my earliest videos because they're just so, like when a YouTuber gets started and their videos are really rough. If you're interested, I did make a review of this. I don't know how good it is. I was proud of it at the time. This book is amazing, as ugly as my videos are, and I love it. And Invisible Cities you're not going to read many novels as short and as beautiful as this novel. This is one of the greatest novels you're ever going to read, short or long. It is so poetic. This book is magical. And if you go to someone's house and they have this book on the shelf, you know that they've got good taste in literature. All right, let's do this a little bit quicker. Just my wife came home and she's hungry and she's in the bedroom saying, when are you going to be finished with the videos? Well, you came home early. What am I supposed to do? Albert Camus, The Outsider. What can I say? Elias Canetti, Auto de Fe. And I haven't read it. I'm waiting to read it. He somehow managed to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. So it must be pretty goddamn good, one hopes. And it's got this really wild cover that looks like it was designed by Terry Gilliam. This extraordinary novel is the story of Peter Kine, a distinguished scholar in Germany between the wars. With masterly precision, Canetti builds up the elements in Kine himself and in his personal relationships which will lead to his destruction. On one side stands his illiterate and grasping housekeeper, nice, Therese, who tricks him into marriage, oh my. And on the other, Benedict, a brutish concierge and typical Nazi material. Between them, Kine, their victim, is forced into the underworld of the city, a purgatory where his guide is a chess-playing dwarf of evil propensities. Eventually restored to his home, he is visited by his brother, an eminent psychiatrist who, by an error of diagnosis, precipitates the final crisis. It just sounds unbelievably fun. I hope it's not goofy. There was that period in literature where things got really goofy, like in the 50s and 60s and 70s. No, 1946. That's pre-goofy. This is a weird one. The House of All Sorts by Emily Carr. Emily Carr is not known in Canada as a writer, more as a painter. You might notice in Canada that our artists often seem to be quite second-rate. They're almost good, but just not quite. It just never seems to get there. I don't know if it's because Canadians tend to be very conservative. We tend not to take great chances with our lives. We like to be very safe, very cautious in the way we go about our existence. And I think in our art as well, you can see that Canadians never really go out to the beyond. We do something, and it's good. It's pretty good. It's just that it doesn't shock you with that. Like it's so new that it's such a revelation that you look at it and think, God, that's never been done before. She was one of those painters, and she wrote a book. The House of All Sorts is the story of Emily Carr's experiences as a landlady in her native city of Victoria. When, in 1913, Miss Carr gave up teaching art, she built an apartment house on property that had belonged to her father. She hoped that she would be able to realize enough from rents to support her so she could devote herself to her painting. Unfortunately, the advent of war and a consequent slump in real estate returns made it necessary for the artist to spend much of her time caretaking and catering to the whims of her tenants. So that's going to be fun because it's rare that an artist, a painter, writes a book. And if it's a biography, then I think that's going to be good to read. I know I'm going to like it more than her paintings. The Big Sleep, Raymond Chandler. Not generally my kind of literature, but it is recognized as one of the great books, so I will read it. Geoffrey Chaucer, Cantabile. I picked this up because I thought I would have to read it for my university studies, and it was a very near miss that I almost had to read it, but then at the last minute I did manage to avoid reading it. Will I ever read it? Well, I think if I live to be about 300 years old, I will get to it eventually. Here's a fun one. The Wapshot Chronicle by John Cheever. John Cheever, very, very underappreciated American writer. Very troubled life. He was very famous for writing short stories, and he became quite pigeonholed as a short story writer, especially for the New Yorker, I believe. Not much known as a novelist, but this, the Wapshot Chronicle, and the sequel, the Wapshot Scandal, both wonderful novels. Although I will say that, yeah, his short stories really are fantastic, and you should read them because he wrote some amazing, fantastic short stories of a very specific era in American life. That period where men worked in the city and they would take the inner city train back to the suburbs, and there would be a bar car and all the men would be smoking cigars and drinking very strong cocktails like Rob Roy's and Old Fashions, playing cards and shooting dice, and they would go back home to their life in the suburbs. Here we go. South Africa. J.M. Coetzee, Disgrace, and J.M. Coetzee, The Life and Times of Michael Kay. This novel won the Booker Award in 1983, and this novel won the Booker Award in 1999. The Booker Award is one of the most prestigious literary awards ever. I think it was created as sort of an answer to the American Pulitzer Prize. In America, you have the Pulitzer, and that's only for Americans, for American writing. And so in England, they created the Booker Award, which was only going to be for England and the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth are all those territories that used to be British. If they have the Queen on the money, that's the Commonwealth, and probably speaking English as well. Ireland, Scotland, India, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and some of those islands in the Caribbean where they speak English and they drink gin. And South Africa, J.M. Coetzee, Disgrace, violent. This one I haven't read, but I'm a huge fan of Coetzee. Disgrace, Waiting for the Barbarians, really disturbing literature, but poignant and important and necessary violence to, he's doing something with it. He's not fooling around. He's not just throwing the violence out there for, to shock us. So 2 Booker Award winning novels from the same author. It's looking forward to this. This one you probably have heard of, but this one somehow gets swept under the carpet for some reason. In a South Africa torn by civil war, Michael Kay sets out to take his ailing mother back to her rural home. On the way there, she dies, leaving him alone in an anarchic, A-N-A-R-C-H-I-C,
Anarchic.
World of brutal roving armies. Imprisoned, Michael is unable to bear confinement and escapes, determined to live with dignity. This life-affirming novel goes to the center of human experiences, the need for an interior spiritual life. I should practice these videos before I record them. Secret Agent by Joseph Conrad. I had to read this for school, as you see. It's also on the big list of videos I'm doing. but I skipped over this one because it's too boring. Gasoline, Gregory Corso, book of poetry. I picked this up in one of the free libraries. I just recognized the name Corso, with Kerouac and Burroughs. He was one of the guys kicking around. I should read it. I mean, it's very short, but I don't know. I just don't get what poetry tries to give me. Stephen Crane, The Red Badge of Courage. Mandatory for every library, mandatory for every literature lover. It is about a soldier in the American Civil War who I think does something cowardly and runs away. I read it, I think, when I was 19, and I just don't remember anything about it except that it's good. And I think while I was reading it, I said, I have to read that later when I'm smarter and I know more about the world. And I haven't got around to it yet. This one, I'm embarrassed to hold this one up because I think I picked this one up by accident. This one was also in the free library. And honestly, I picked it up because of the penguin logo. There's Nicole Kidman and, that girl from Spider-Man. And I think she's also somebody now. I thought Clint Eastwood made a movie of this in the 70s. It was free. And I keep meaning to take it back to the free library, but on the other hand, I keep thinking, well, maybe it's something. Just because it looks like it's totally made for chicks, maybe it's not. Sometimes the marketers, they like to play these games like, let's make it look like it's for women, and maybe a whole bunch of women will buy it because, women are the main book buyers these days. Look at this monster. The House of Leaves. I have heard stories of this one, scary stories, frightening stories, that this book is mind-bending and not to be taken lightly. Like, this is a book that might break you. It looks like it's been through a battleground. I picked this one up secondhand, obviously. Obviously. I don't know anything about it, although I've heard that this book sends people to the madhouse. Perhaps I should not read it, and maybe I won't, but I've got it. I'm sure I will read it, though. Hard Times, Charles Dickens. Again, like there were some books that I just picked up because I thought I might have to read them at university. I don't like Charles Dickens. Doctorow, Billy Bathgate. Ragtime by Doctorow. This book is, this book looks like it might be the most boring book on earth. It's got a boring cover, it's got a boring title, and the author's name is also boring. I'm sorry, Doctorow. But this was one of the best books I've ever read. This is like a time machine back to America, I think 150 years ago, to the birth of New York City. It's genius. I really have to read this one again because I loved it so very much the first time I read it. And it's one of those books that that you've got to read it a couple of times to really get all the essence from it. Really fantastic, which is why I bought the Billy Bathgate, because I've also read from Doctorow, I've read World's Fair, also brilliant, and Waterworks, which every one of his books are very entertaining and like a time portal to another era. Like, it is amazing his knowledge of these past worlds. Singular Man, J.P. Dunleavy. I've read a lot. Well, have I read a lot of J.P.? No, I've read the best of J.P. Dunleavy. I've read The Ginger Man, and I've read The Beautiful Beatitudes of Balthazar B., which, even though it's got an incredibly goofy title, is a great novel. And I've heard that A Singular Man is also a really good one. Like J.P. Dunleavy, The Ginger Man, and Balthazar B. Very, very funny. Funny, ironic, and kind of sad also. Like, most of the authors can do sad, and most of them can do ironic. But there aren't very many authors who can do funny, unfortunately, because funny is the best thing. Paddy Clark, ha ha ha, Roddy Doyle. Winner of the Booker Prize in, I believe, 1999. I remember it was really big when it came out. The Booker Prize is really a stamp that it's going to be good to read. Always, every time? I don't know, but I think it is very much worth reading every single book that won the Booker Award. Margaret Drabble, The Millstone, that's on one of my lists. I don't know which list it's on, but it's on one of them, so I picked it up. This old penguin. Rosamund, independent, sophisticated, enviably clever, is terrified of true maturity. Then, ironically, her first sexual experience leaves her pregnant. In The Millstone, Margaret Drabble shows how Rosamund faces up to a failed abortion and to the trials of unmarried motherhood. The Millstone is a remarkable study of emotional transition, direct, funny, deeply touching, compulsive reading in the highest order. Yeah, short, 172 pages. I think that's some 1970s feminism. I think. I'm not sure. Don't crucify me. It kind of looks like it is. Sister Carrie by Theodore Dreiser. I read it. I think it was my 2022 or 2023 TBR. Very good, important, classic American literature. Marguerite Duras, The Ravishing of Lowstein. I got this as a Christmas present for my wife. We ordered a bunch of books because that's what I always want for my birthday and for Christmas is a bunch of books. That makes me happy. The Ravishing of Lowstein. It looks like it's going to be a weird one, like one of those twisted French strained relationship novels. I don't know why the French do conflicted relationships so well. Must be the character, must be the wine. And finally, the Alexandria Quartet by Lawrence Durrell. Justine is the first one, Balthazar is the second one, Mount Olive is the third one, and Clea is the fourth one in the quartet. The Alexandria Quartet is one of my absolute favorite things of all time. I know I say that about every goddamn book I pick up. It seems like I say, oh, this is my favorite, that's my favorite. But honestly, I've read the Alexandria Quartet, all four of them. I've read it. The series I've read 4 times, and I don't think I will ever get tired of reading this series. It is one of the greatest things you can ever read is the Alexandria Quartet. And Lawrence Durrell is criminally underappreciated. And so is this series. Like, this series needs to be, when people talk about literature and they talk about Ulysses and they talk about War and Peace and they talk about Moby Dick, throw those all out. You should be talking about the Alexandria Quartet in terms of brilliance and entertainment. Like, it is a wonderful story to read, told by someone who has like an artistic gift for literature. Absolutely literature in the top category. I will post a link to the video I made of the Alexandria Quartet. Now I have to end the video because my wife is in the bedroom, furious that I have postponed her lunch to entertain my little YouTube hobby. I've still got I've got 6 more that I could do my bookshelf tour. That was kind of a fun one, although there were, some weird, but that's always with my bookshelves. There's some classic stuff that everybody knows, everybody recognizes, and then there's all the absurdities, which I have quite a lot of. 34 books, and I've read exactly 17 of them. Coincidence it works out that way, but yeah, I've only read half of the books that are on the shelf there, because like a lot of people, I buy more books than I actually read. Thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry every time I make one of these book tour videos, it seems like I've really got to get to the end of it as quickly as possible because something is weighing on me. Take care. So this will be the quick version for those people who are in a rush and they want to get to the next video.